time, and I call the member for Perth.
Thank you. Look, this will be a day of some considerable celebration by many Australians who are suffering, who or their children are suffering a variety of medical conditions and who find very real relief in the use of cannabis. And we're talking about conditions such as epilepsy, glaucoma, migraine, pain associated with degenerative diseases and spinal injuries. And we also know, of course, that this is a product that can assist those people, those many tens of thousands of Australians that are going through chemotherapy at any one time as they seek to struggle with the nausea that often is generated as part of by the chemotherapy. So it's an important day that here we are beginning to understand that we need to act on this, that we need to put aside some of the past irrationalities that have surrounded the use of cannabis and many other drugs in this community, and start coming up with a series of very well thought through rational policies to allow us to get this mix right, to get our legislative regime on a proper rational path. Now, I do note with some interest that it was indeed 90 years ago that the Commonwealth first legislated to ban cannabis in Australia, and then we subsequently saw a series of complementary state legislation introduced. But it was 1926 that the Commonwealth first legislated in this area. Certainly in the 19th century, cannabis had been a very commonly used pharmaceutical or medical therapy. It was recognised that it had very positive qualities. What happened at the turn of the 20th century? Cannabis became very much tied up with big debates about migration, both in America and to a lesser extent in Australia, but certainly we had our own version of that, and concern over opium and how our attitudes towards opium became very much intermingled with issues associated with migration from Asia. In the United States, which led the charge in the banning of cannabis, it was very much associated with Mexican migration. So we've finally now got back to a point, I think, and it's part of the cycle, that we are now beginning to understand that there are many naturally occurring products that are very, very beneficial and that have real medicinal qualities, and that we're prepared to move beyond some of the almost hysterical reactions to these products and put in place an access regime that will allow those people that really can benefit from the use of these drugs to do so. This is a very cautious piece of legislation, I think. It has been embraced because the state governments of New South Wales and Victoria have indicated that they want to commence a process of trials, of clinical trials, for cannabis-derived products. In New South Wales, and both in New South Wales and Victoria, they will be doing trials into the treatment of children with severe drug-resistant epilepsy. And I do note that this is a very real issue, and in my home state of Western Australia, Suresh Rajan, the Chief Executive of the Epilepsy Association, said that he would have up to 100 mothers who use it on their children illegally, and he was part of this advocacy group that has got us to this position today, where we are going to see a series of trials I also note, and I'm very pleased, that New South Wales has also indicated that they will not be confining their trials just simply to children with drug-resistant epilepsy, but they will also be taking into account, they will be doing separate trials, hopefully, on adults with terminal illnesses, focusing on improving quality of life and the symptoms, pain, nausea and vomiting. And that they will also be looking at adults, a trial for adults with chemotherapy-induced nausea, where standard treatments are ineffective. So we see there will be considerable movement. These trials are going to take place in those two states, and of course, in order to allow this to happen, to give these states the capacity to do this, we must of course amend our national regulatory regime. And I'm very pleased to say that we have had bipartisan support on this, and I do want to acknowledge also the groups, the parliamentary Friends group that have been pushing for this for some years, and to acknowledge all of those people with medical conditions and their families that have I think with so much vigour and integrity pursued this issue. And I very much look forward to these trials being concluded and us then allowing any of the persons within those classifications having access to the very, very therapeutic benefits that I am sure will be upheld as a result of these trials. I mean, the anecdotal evidence, the historic evidence, is so strong that I think we can be fairly confident that there will be positive outcomes from these trials. And we always, it's interesting reflecting on some of the history against the use of cannabis has come from pharmaceutical companies who prefer to ensure that their own product, their manufactured products, have exclusivity in the marketplace. And I just hope that we're now at a place of sufficient rationality where we can let the science and not the benefit of these pharmaceutical companies be the force that drives the policy settings that we have. I do note that there is some disappointment amongst some of the activists in this area that the bodies that are going to be able to grow and supply will tend to be commercial entities, and but I think probably in order to get this underway, that this is not perhaps an unreasonable first step. But I do say, into the future, once we've gone through this trial process, I think we should be very open to ensuring that we do review who we are in fact going to be prepared to license. I noticed the previous speaker, sorry, I'm not sure what seat he is from, but the previous speaker expressed concern, the member for Page expressed concern about that this may get into the hands of organised crime. I think one of the ironies is that it is our legislative regime that has to a very large extent driven the organised crime, and that there are, if you look at the history of the introduction of prohibition of alcohol into the United States, that led to the wholesale establishment of mafia and no doubt Ndrogada and other organised crime syndicates into the United States. We see much the same thing with the drug trade. And it is the very illegality, the insistence that we focus so much on the supply side and not the demand side, that has led to the generation of organised crime. So I do think it is important that that we also, as well as dealing with this issue of the medicinal use of cannabis, we in the longer run be prepared to look at a more rational regime around the more general recreational use of cannabis. And at this point, I note that I'm veering into my own space and not into necessarily determined a Labor Party policy here. But I was pleased to be part of a Labor government in Western Australia that introduced a measure of decriminalisation into cannabis, because we actually understood that the more that you can take this out of the hands of organised crime, the better it was for society. The more that, fairly what is a pretty widely used drug within the community, the arguments that this has become a gateway drug is probably, if there is any truth in it, it is true because we are connecting people to organised crime and to other drugs by requiring this to be a drug that is, in fact, only marketed through organised crime. And I think it is interesting to see that not only are there more than 20 states in the United States that have permitted the medical cannabis to be prescribed, but there are a number of states now that are moving towards a more general decriminalisation of cannabis, in recognition that we really need to deal with the demand side, and that secondly, that all we have really been doing to a very considerable extent is providing a business model for organised crime. So I would hope that this is a debate about which we can be a little more rational into the future, and that this small and modest step towards trials of medicinal cannabis will start opening our minds to a more objective assessment of how best we deal with the problem of drug use. And I don't think it is possible to exaggerate the destructiveness of ice, for example, on individual users, and the degree to which people can very, very easily, people from all socio-economic groups in society, not people that are simply those that have family problems or personal problems, but indeed anyone can find themselves in the grip of ice. But I wonder whether or not part of our difficulty in controlling this is because we tend to take the same attitude towards all drugs or all psychotropic substances, and that perhaps undermines our credibility with those people who we would seek to educate about those drugs that have these very, very significant risks. And we don't send out a nuanced and, dare I say, believable message often to many of our young people, because we lump all of these substances in together with the label bad. Now, I'm certainly have long been part of a drug law reform movement that believes that the focus on harm minimisation must be the way to go, that we must be looking as much at the demand side as the supply side, and that is deeply concerned about the power of organised crime, the resources that we are putting, the business model that we're making available to organised crime with our current regime of drug laws. But again, want to compliment all the people that have been involved in lobbying for this over the years, and I really hope many people will find a great deal of relief.